Mortal Shell is a third-person, melee combat-focused, Souls-like action RPG game that has been developed by Cold Symmetry, an indie dev studio that was founded in 2017. The game has been released in August 2020 for PC, PS4 and Xbox One. Besides quite a few bugfix and optimization patches, a remastered version released in March 2021 for consoles. This remastered version, called Enhanced Edition, brought 4K resolution, enhanced textures and improved loading times to all console versions, as well as 60 FPS to the PS5 and Xbox S version. The PC version of Mortal Shell is a timed Epic Game Store exclusive and is expected to be available on Steam this summer. The game is currently priced at €30 or $1. Mortal Shell plays in a dark fantasy universe. The journey of the foundling starts in Fulgrim, where you find the old prisoner that asks you to retrieve him the sacred glands that he needs to heal himself. To make this easier, you as the foundling can inhabit shells, which are the remains of defeated warriors. Shells have individual strengths, as well as unique passive skill trees that can be upgraded over time. The 3 dungeons in which the sacred glands are located are all connected to Fulgrim. These are the Shrine of Ash, a fire-themed area, the Seat of Infinity, a black stone-themed area, and the Crypt of the Martyrs, an ice-themed area. The glands that you receive after defeating the final boss of each dungeon can be collected in any order you want. This non-linearity is in my opinion a questionable design choice. As far as I can tell, there is no enemy scaling in the game, which means that the first dungeon you enter will always be way more difficult than the second and the third. The world design in Mortal Shell is impressive for a game that was made by only 15 people. Environmental assets look great, from magnificent sculptures to the small cozy campfires with enemies chilling and playing the lute. Cold Symmetry did a really good job at making a dark, heavy, gloomy fantasy game world. One aspect that I sometimes found exhausting is the navigation through the map. The Fulgrim area with all its caves and connection tunnels is unnecessarily complex and confusing, especially for a short game like Mortal Shell. The main quest with its 7 boss fights only takes around 15 hours to complete, so it felt a bit out of place to wander around for half an hour to find the entrance to one of the dungeons. Also, the Blackstone themed level with all its teleporters and annoying archers was pretty painful to get through. Other than that, Mortal Shell's world is filled with cues to the game's lore. Be it dialogues with NPCs or stone carvings, the game has not Dark Souls levels of lore, but there is a lot of background information to discover for those who are interested. Sester Genessa, an immortal observer, acts as the bonfire in Mortal Shell. She keeps your flesh safe when you die and makes sure you can resurrect in your shell. She can upgrade your shell in exchange of tar and glimpses, which is the equivalent of souls. This is also the place to save and reset enemy spawns. A restriction that I don't like is that you cannot freely quick travel between locations you have already visited. Or let's say you can, but only after you fully max out your shell and buy an item which is probably somewhere near the end of your playthrough. Visually, Mortal Shell looks fantastic. The shells are exceptionally well crafted. Also, character models and environmental textures are what one would expect in a modern third-person RPG game. A really nice feature that was introduced with a post-launch update is the photo mode, an amazing tool that I wish more developers would put into their games. The photo mode lets you freeze the game at any time to make a screenshot. It lets you look around freely and you can change values like field of view, saturation, brightness, contrast, color, resolution and many more. You can also remove enemies or your own character model from the picture. You can even let the game progress while staying in photo mode. Animations in Mortal Shell are pretty good. I experienced some minor glitches here and there, but nothing game-breaking. The running animation feels a bit snappy and could be a bit more weighted and grounded. The audio scenery is very minimalistic, but good. Voice acting is good too for the most part, especially if you consider the game's budget. The overall immersion is very good and definitely one of the game's strongest points. The combat in Mortal Shell is heavily melee focused and has stamina as a spamming limitation. There are 4 different melee weapons in the game. One could criticize the lack of weapon variety, and while it doesn't bother me personally, it definitely hurts the game's replay value. There is a hollowed sword, which is the starter weapon, an all-around balanced choice, decent speed, okay range, alright stamina game, and alright damage. The Martyr Blade is a slow and heavy sword that has great reach and deals massive amounts of damage. These big swings, however, cost lots of stamina. Hammer and Chisel is a fast weapon that uses very little stamina. It can stagger and poison. The Smoldering Mace is a long-ranged weapon that has high damage, really good sweeping attacks, but rather slow wind-ups. Each weapon except the Hollowed Sword needs to be unlocked in a boss fight at the entrance of each dungeon. The combat in Mortal Shell has familiar elements of other Souls-like games, but is overall definitely its own thing, and I have to say that I actually like the feel of Mortal Shell's combat a lot. Offensive-wise, each weapon has a custom light attack chain and a custom heavy attack chain. These can be mixed together. You can, for example, do a heavy light heavy combo, and you will get the second light attack from the light attack chain into your combo. Each weapon also has 2 special abilities that can be unlocked, as well as a charging attack. There's a lot you can do with combos timing wise, like charging up attacks or delaying attacks within a combo. Attacks in general feel heavy and impactful and give good feedback on hit. As for defense, you also have multiple options. First and foremost, there is Harden, which is Mortal Shell's trademark ability. Harden turns your shell into stone, makes you invulnerable to the next incoming attack, and often staggers normal enemies when they hit it. It can be activated at pretty much any point in time. Harden only has a 5-second cooldown and becomes ridiculously strong as soon as you get a feel for how to abuse it. I really like the idea of the Harden mechanic, as it allows for an offensive playstyle. In practice, however, the ability feels a bit overtuned. A big part of the enjoyment of Souls-like games is to learn boss attack patterns and adapt to them. The way Harden is implemented, however, often lets you completely ignore what your enemy is doing. The other 2 defensive mechanisms are dodge and parry. Dodge costs stamina and has no cooldown. Parry lets you block an incoming attack, and if you have at least 1 bar of resolve, you can follow up your parry with a riposte, which will heal you by a bit. The parry timing felt at first a bit clunky, especially if you don't have resolve to riposte, as the parry window seems to be much smaller then. As one can see, there are plenty of options for offense and defense in Mortal Shell. Most of these options, especially the offensive ones, are primarily for role-playing. Well, of course, at the end of the day, it's a role-playing game. You could easily beat this game by never using most of the tools the game offers, which leads me to my main gripe with Mortal Shell, the difficulty curve. As you start out and don't know anything about the mechanics, you might think the game is hard and unforgiving, but once you start upgrading your weapon and your shell, the game becomes incredibly easy. Easy to a point where I could beat the last 2 bosses of the game on the first try without much problems, which is something that shouldn't ever happen. Yes, one could grind New Game Plus runs for a better challenge, but in my opinion that is not how single-player game design should be. While the visual design of bosses is pretty impressive, combat or moveset-wise bosses in Mortal Shell are rather lackluster. Most attacks are easy to react to, which might sound fair, but it often feels like there is no real threat of getting hit. Additionally, bosses have a very limited moveset and often spam the same attack pattern throughout the phase. Mortal Shell has no character creation, nor any traditional character stats that could be upgraded. All there is 4 different shells and 4 different weapons. There is no way of making your character unique, which is not necessarily a bad thing, just something noteworthy. The 4 shells differ from each other in health, stamina and resolve. Additionally, every shell has its own passive skill tree that can be upgraded. Haros is the balanced shell. He has average health, stamina and resolve. His shell tree revolves a lot around the Harden ability, making its active longer, reduce the cooldown, etc. Eridim is the tank. He has a lot of health but low stamina and low resolve. Teal has a ton of stamina and has a blink-like ability, but low health and low resolve. His passive tree revolves around stamina and poison talents. Solomon has a huge resolve pool, which promotes extensive use of the parry and riposte mechanic. He also has a decent health and average stamina pool. To get at least some sort of cosmetic variety into the game, a post-launch update brought 8 skins into the game, 2 for each shell. These can be unlocked by completing a mini-quest. So, is this game worth playing or not in 2021? I would say it depends. If you're looking for Dark Souls-like character creation and progression, and high replay value, then you might be disappointed with Mortal Shell. It wouldn't be fair, however, to compare this game with a game like Dark Souls, that probably had 10 times the development resources. Personally, I enjoyed my Mortal Shell playthrough a lot, and I think that most people that like Souls-like exploration and boss fights would do so too. Mortal Shell is a short, but pleasant to look at, and for the most part, well-crafted game that has a great combat feel. My recommendation for anyone that doesn't want to burst through the later parts of the game, however, is to not use acids to upgrade their weapon. Alright guys, that's it for this review. Let me know in the comments what you think about Mortal Shell. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this video and press subscribe for more reviews, news and guides. As always, thank you all for watching and see you soon.